Anxiety can feel like a storm inside your mind, racing thoughts, restless nights, a constant feeling that something is wrong. You try to silence it, fight it, escape it, but it keeps coming back stronger. But what if the real problem isn't anxiety at all? What if it's the way your mind has learned to think, the patterns you repeat without even realizing? The truth is, anxiety is often just a signal, a message from parts of you that have been ignored for too long. And if you've been feeling trapped in that cycle, wondering why your mind won't quiet down, then this video is for you. Anxiety doesn't appear randomly. It follows patterns, and every pattern has a story behind it. The more you try to silence what's inside you, the louder that signal becomes. Maybe the way out of anxiety isn't running from it, but finally turning to face it. Because healing doesn't begin when fear disappears. It begins when you're willing to feel what you've been avoiding all along.
You wake up tired, even though you slept. The room is quiet, nothing is wrong. No alarms, no emergencies, no obvious threat. And yet, before your eyes are fully open, something is already moving inside you. A tightness in your chest, a subtle pressure behind your ribs. Thoughts lining up, one after another, like they've been waiting for you to return. Did you say the wrong thing yesterday? What if today goes badly? What if you forget something important? What if something happens to someone you love? You haven't even gotten out of bed, and already your mind is scanning for danger in a world that, at least on the surface, looks perfectly safe. This is how anxiety often lives, not as a dramatic breakdown, not as something others can easily see, but as a constant inner weather system, a storm moving quietly behind the face you show the world. To everyone else, you seem fine. You go to work, you reply to messages, you smile in conversations, you meet deadlines, you keep things together. From the outside, your life may even look stable, successful, normal. But inside, it's different. Inside, your mind rarely rests. It rehearses conversations that haven't happened yet. It replays moments that already passed, searching for mistakes. It imagines futures in vivid detail, futures where things go wrong, where you fail, where you lose control. Your body reacts as if these imagined scenarios are real. Your heart beats faster, your stomach tightens, your breath becomes shallow. You tell yourself you're just being responsible, prepared, thoughtful, but beneath all that mental effort is something else. A constant sense that something isn't quite safe. At night, when the world grows quiet, the storm gets louder. With no distractions left, your thoughts echo. Small concerns become full stories. Minor uncertainties become looming disasters. You try to relax, but your body stays alert, as if it's waiting for something to happen. And the strangest part is this. Often, nothing is actually happening. No one is chasing you. No immediate crisis is unfolding. Yet your nervous system behaves as though danger is right around the corner, as though you must stay vigilant just in case. We live in one of the most technologically advanced periods in human history. Many of the physical threats our ancestors faced daily, predators, famine, constant exposure to violence, are far less common for many people today. We have climate control, medical care, instant communication, endless information at our fingertips. And yet, anxiety disorders are more common than ever. How can a world that is, in many ways, more comfortable and secure produce minds that feel constantly on edge? Maybe the answer isn't just out there. Maybe it's in here. Because anxiety doesn't always come from the present moment. Often it comes from something older, patterns, fears, and emotional memories that live below the surface of awareness. things you don't consciously think about, but that still shape how your body and mind respond to the world. You might believe your anxiety is about your job, your relationships, your future, your responsibilities, and sometimes those things do play a role. But what if they're not the full story? What if anxiety is less like a malfunction and more like a signal that something inside you is unsettled, something that hasn't been fully understood, felt, or expressed, something that your conscious mind has learned to push aside in order to function, succeed, survive? Imagine there are parts of you, emotions, memories, fears, even desires that you learned at some point were inconvenient, unacceptable, or unsafe to show. So you hid them, you pushed them down, you built a version of yourself that could move through the world more easily. But hidden does not mean gone. What is pushed out of sight often moves into the background of the mind, where it continues to influence you in quieter, more indirect ways. It can show up as tension with no clear cause, as worry that seems bigger than the situation, as a constant feeling that you must stay in control, stay alert, stay ahead. In other words, it can show up as anxiety. And if that's true, then the anxiety you've been trying so hard to silence might not be an enemy at all. It might be a messenger, a signal flare from parts of you that have been living in the shadows, trying to get your attention in the only way they can. The more you ignore the signal, the louder it becomes. So here is the unsettling possibility, and also the beginning of something hopeful. What if anxiety isn't your enemy, but a message from a part of you that has been ignored? There's a moment many people with anxiety know well. You're sitting in a quiet room. Nothing urgent is happening. Maybe you're scrolling on your phone, answering emails, or just staring at a wall after a long day. And suddenly, without warning, a thought appears. What if I mess this up? What if they're upset with me? What if something goes wrong tomorrow? The thought is small at first, but your body treats it as small. Your chest tightens, your heart beats a little faster, your mind leans in, as if the thought is important, as if it contains a threat that must be understood immediately. Within seconds, you're no longer just having a thought. You're inside a scenario, a conversation that hasn't happened yet, a mistake that doesn't exist, a future that may never come, and your body reacts as though it's real. This is where anxiety begins to feel like the mind turning against itself, because the same abilities that make you intelligent, creative, and capable of planning for the future are the ones that can trap you in endless loops of imagined danger. The human brain evolved to predict threats before they happened, to imagine worst-case scenarios and prepare for them. In the wild, this ability could mean the difference between life and death. But your brain didn't evolve for emails or social media or performance reviews or the subtle social signals of modern life. It still scans the environment the way it did thousands of years ago, searching for signs that something might be wrong. Only now, the predators are deadlines, unanswered messages, financial uncertainty, the fear of saying the wrong thing, the feeling that you're falling behind. Your mind becomes a hyperactive security system, detecting danger in tone of voice, facial expressions, silence, ambiguity. A delayed reply can feel like rejection. A small mistake can feel like a disaster. A quiet moment can feel like the calm before something bad happens. And because the brain is so good at imagining, it doesn't just react to what is happening, it reacts to what could happen. Imagination, once a survival tool, becomes a source of endless hypothetical futures. You don't just think, I have a meeting tomorrow. You think, what if I say something wrong? What if they judge me? What if this affects my career? What if everything falls apart from there? Each step feels logical, reasonable, responsible, but your body doesn't know the difference between imagination and reality. Every imagined scenario triggers a real stress response. Your nervous system floods with signals that something is wrong. Muscles tense, breathing shifts, focus narrows. And so the mind, trying to help, doubles down. It says, we must think this through. We must solve this. We must stay on top of everything. What began as a survival mechanism becomes a closed loop. The more you think, the more your body reacts. The more your body reacts, the more convinced your mind becomes that there really is danger. It feels like you are fighting an invisible enemy, but the enemy is actually a system designed to protect you, now working overtime in a world it was never built for. And here is where the psychological story deepens. Most of what drives this system is not happening in the part of your mind you're aware of. You experience the thoughts, the tension, the worry, but the deeper emotional forces beneath them often remain unseen. You might believe your anxiety is purely about the present, this job, this relationship, this decision, but often
This is where the tone shifts. Because if anxiety were simply a flaw in your character, you could blame yourself. You could say, I'm just weak, I'm just too sensitive, I just need to try harder. But if anxiety is a system, ancient, intelligent, and shaped by forces beyond your awareness, then blame starts to give way to curiosity. Instead of asking, what's wrong with me, you begin to ask, where did this come from? What is my mind trying to protect me from? What part of me is still on guard? And that question opens a door. Because your anxiety is not random, it's patterned, and patterns always come from somewhere. There's a strange thing about anxiety that most people never stop to question. It often doesn't make sense. You can be safe, successful, surrounded by people who care about you, and still feel like something inside is deeply unsettled. You tell yourself you should be grateful. You try to focus on the positives. You push the feeling down, distract yourself, promise you'll deal with it later. But later never really comes. Instead, the tension builds quietly in the background. It shows up as restlessness, overthinking, sudden waves of dread that seem to appear from nowhere. And the more you try to ignore it, the more it seems to grow. Carl Jung had a word for the part of us we tried to ignore. He called it the shadow. The shadow is not some dark, evil force hiding in the psyche. It is simply the collection of parts of you that were pushed out of awareness because they didn't feel safe, acceptable, or lovable. Traits, emotions, impulses, and needs that, at some point in your life, you learned to hide, even from yourself. As children, we are incredibly sensitive to what is welcomed and what is rejected. If expressing anger led to punishment, we learned to suppress it. If showing vulnerability brought shame, we learned to harden. If being too expressive, too ambitious, too emotional made us stand out in uncomfortable ways, we quietly trimmed those parts away. Not consciously, not with a decision, but through adaptation. You learned, often without realizing it, which parts of you made connection easier and which parts made it harder. So you built an identity around what was acceptable. You became the strong one, the responsible one, the easygoing one, the high achiever, the good friend, and everything that didn't fit that image, the fear, the neediness, the jealousy, the sadness, the anger, even the wild creativity or deep longing you didn't know what to do with, was pushed into the background, into the shadow. But here's the part most people miss. Those parts don't disappear. They don't dissolve just because you stop looking at them. They remain alive in the unconscious, still carrying emotional energy, still wanting expression, still influencing your behavior in ways you don't fully understand. And when something in your life stirs them, a relationship, a failure, a moment of uncertainty, even quiet time alone with your thoughts, they begin to move. You feel it not as a clear message, but as anxiety, a sense that something is wrong, even when you can't explain why, a tightness in your chest, a sudden surge of worry, an urge to distract yourself, to stay busy, to control everything around you. From Jung's perspective, anxiety is often what happens when the shadow tries to come into awareness and the conscious mind resists. It's like there's something inside you knocking on a door you've kept closed for years. Maybe it's old grief you never had space to feel. Maybe it's anger you were taught was unacceptable. Maybe it's a deep desire to live differently, to say no, to change direction that clashes with the life you've built. Whatever it is, it doesn't come politely. It comes as a feeling first, a disturbance, a pressure. The conscious mind doesn't recognize it as a lost part of the self. It interprets it as danger. And so you try to push it away. You scroll, you work harder, you plan more, you overthink. You try to fix the outside world so the inside world will quiet down. But the more you run, the more the shadow gathers energy, like water building behind a dam. Society doesn't help with this. From an early age, many of us are taught that certain emotions are weaknesses. Don't be so sensitive. Be strong. Stay positive. Move on. Productivity is praised. Emotional depth is often tolerated in small, controlled doses. So we learn to manage our image carefully, to be functional, composed, efficient. But the parts of us that don't fit that image don't vanish. They wait. And the longer they are ignored, the louder they knock. Anxiety, in this sense, is not a malfunction. It's a signal, a sign that there's something within you that has been denied a voice for too long.
The real danger isn't the anxious feeling itself. It's the growing distance between you and your inner life. The longer you stay disconnected from what's happening inside, the more foreign and frightening it feels when it finally breaks through. It's like ignoring a message that keeps appearing on your screen. At first, it's easy to swipe away. Then, it returns. You mark it as unread, promising you'll deal with it later. But the notifications keep coming, louder, brighter, more intrusive, until eventually you can't focus on anything else. Anxiety is like that unread message. The more you avoid opening it, the more urgent it becomes. This is why constant distraction doesn't calm anxiety in the long run. It trains the mind to fear inner experience even more. You never learn that you can sit with discomfort and survive it. You never discover that emotions rise, peak, and fall on their own when given space. Instead, you only learn to run. And the more you run, the more the mind assumes there must be something truly dangerous behind you. But what if the thing you're running from isn't a threat, but a part of you asking to be known? What if the way out of anxiety is not escape, but confrontation? There is a moment, usually small and easily missed, when anxiety first begins to rise. A tightening in the chest, a flicker of unease, a thought that something might go wrong. And almost instantly, another reaction appears. Push it away. You try to distract yourself, to calm yourself down, to replace the feeling with something more acceptable. You analyze it, argue with it, judge yourself for having it in the first place. Anything to make it stop. This is where most of the battle with anxiety actually happens, not in the feeling itself, but in the resistance to it. Carl Jung believed that healing does not come from eliminating parts of ourselves, but from integrating them. What we reject does not vanish. It moves into the unconscious and returns in distorted forms. Anxiety, in this sense, is not an enemy to defeat, but a messenger from parts of the psyche that have been exiled. The more you try to silence it, the more urgently it tries to be heard. But something changes the moment you stop fighting. Imagine the next time anxiety rises. Instead of immediately trying to fix it, you pause. Not to force yourself to relax, not to pretend it isn't there, just to notice. There is anxiety here. You feel it in the body, the tightness, the heat, the quickened breath. You notice the thoughts spinning stories about what might happen, what could go wrong. And instead of wrestling with them, you take one small step back internally, like watching a storm through a window instead of standing in the rain. This shift seems simple, almost too simple, but it is radical, because anxiety feeds on resistance. When the mind labels a sensation as dangerous, "This shouldn't be happening, I can't handle this, I need this to stop," the nervous system hears a signal of threat. The body tightens further, the mind searches harder for escape, the loop intensifies. But when a feeling is allowed, something different occurs. The body, no longer receiving signals of internal war, begins to regulate on its own. Sensations rise and fall, thoughts come and go. The wave of anxiety, which once felt endless, reveals itself to have a rhythm. You begin to discover a surprising truth. The fear of anxiety is often more painful than anxiety itself. Many people are not only anxious, they're anxious about being anxious. They fear losing control, embarrassing themselves, being overwhelmed. So when the first signs of anxiety appear, panic about panic kicks in. The mind races ahead. What if this gets worse? What if I can't stop it? What if something is wrong with me? This secondary fear is what turns a passing wave into a storm. But when you stay present with the original feeling, not collapsing into it, not running from it, just allowing it, the cycle weakens. You begin to discover through direct experience that discomfort does not automatically mean danger, that intense sensations can move through you without destroying you. This is not about forcing yourself into fear or pretending you're calm when you're not. It's about developing the capacity to be with what is already happening. Jung called this integration, bringing unconscious material into awareness so it can be related to consciously rather than acting out through symptoms. Anxiety often points to emotions, memories, or parts of yourself that were once unacceptable. Anger you weren't allowed to express, sadness you had to suppress, vulnerability you learned to hide. When these parts begin to surface, the nervous system reacts as if something is wrong. But what's actually happening is a movement towards wholeness. A part of you is trying to come home. Meeting anxiety with awareness instead of resistance is how you open the door. You might notice that when you allow a feeling, it changes. It may intensify for a moment, like a wave cresting, but then it begins to soften. The body trembles, breath deepens, tears come, or a long sigh releases tension you didn't know you were holding. These are not signs of failure. They are signs that energy that was stuck is finally moving. Courage in this process looks very different from what we are used to. It is not gritting your teeth and pushing through. It is not forcing positivity or suppressing fear. It is the quiet willingness to stay present with your inner experience without immediately trying to change it. It is sitting in the passenger seat of a storm and discovering that you are larger than the weather passing through you. Over time, something subtle but profound happens. Anxiety loses some of its mystery. You recognize its early signals. You know what it feels like in your body. You know that it peaks and falls. You trust your capacity to stay with it. You are no longer trying to control every internal movement. You are learning to relate to them. And in that relationship, fear loosens its grip. Because you don't overcome anxiety by becoming fearless. You overcome it by becoming willing to feel. There is a strange assumption most of us carry without ever questioning it, that the mind is supposed to be quiet, that thoughts and emotions should line up neatly, behave logically, and stay under conscious control. And when something rises from within that feels irrational, intense, or unfamiliar, like anxiety, we treat it as an intruder, a malfunction, noise in the system. But what if it isn't noise? What if it's a voice you never learned how to understand? Carl Jung believed the human psyche is not a single unified thing. It is more like an inner world, filled with forgotten memories, disowned emotions, unlived desires, old fears, and unrealized potential. Most of this inner world operates outside of conscious awareness, and when it wants attention, it doesn't send emails or speak in clear sentences. It speaks in feelings, in images, in sensations, in dreams, and very often in anxiety. Imagine just for a moment treating anxiety not as something to shut down, but as something trying to communicate. The next time that tightness rises in your chest or that restless unease hums under the surface, instead of immediately reaching for if this tightness in my chest could speak, what would it be afraid of? If this restless energy had an image, what would it look like? You don't have to force answers, you simply create space for something to emerge. Sometimes it comes as a memory you haven't thought about in years. Sometimes as a realization, I'm terrified of disappointing people. I'm exhausted from pretending I'm fine. I'm angry, but I don't let myself feel it. What was once a vague storm begins to take shape. And when something has shape, it becomes something you can relate to, not just react to. This changes the entire dynamic inside you. Anxiety is no longer an enemy attacking from nowhere. It becomes a messenger from a part of your psyche that has been carrying something alone. A younger part, a hurt part, a scared part, a part that adapted long ago and never got the chance to update its story. When you approach that part with curiosity instead of fear, it softens. Not instantly, not dramatically, but gradually, like an animal that stops baring its teeth when it realizes it is not being hunted. You might find yourself saying internally, "I see you. I didn't realize how afraid you were. I didn't know you were still carrying this." This is not imagination in the sense of making things up. It is imagination in the sense of giving inner experience a language you can understand. Symbols, emotions, and sensations become bridges between conscious awareness and unconscious material. And as that bridge forms, something integrates. The energy that once surged through you as anxiety begins to transform. The tightness becomes grief that can be cried. The restlessness becomes anger that can be acknowledged. The dread becomes vulnerability that can be held with compassion. You start to realize your inner world is not chaos, it is meaning waiting to be understood. For most of your life, you may have tried to control your inner experience like a strict manager, demanding order and productivity. But the unconscious does not respond to force, it responds to attention. When you listen, truly listen, the psyche reorganizes itself. The parts that were split off begin to feel included, and anxiety, which once screamed to be noticed, no longer has to shout so loudly. This is the philosophical shift at the heart of Jung's work. Healing is not about conquering the unconscious, but entering into relationship with it. You are not a battlefield of competing forces. You are an ecosystem learning to come back into balance. And the moment you ask, "What part of me is trying to be heard?" you step out of the war and into dialogue. That is where integration begins. That is where anxiety starts to transform, not because you silenced it, but because you finally listened. There is a moment, quiet, almost unnoticeable, when the war inside you begins to end. Not because anxiety disappears overnight, not because the mind finally becomes silent, but because something deeper shifts in how you relate to yourself. For most of your life, anxiety may have felt like an internal enemy, a force sabotaging your peace, a weakness you needed to overcome. You fought it with logic, distraction, discipline, and self-improvement, and when that failed, you fought yourself. But Jung believed the psyche does not heal through domination, it heals through integration. He called this process individuation, the lifelong movement toward becoming whole, not perfect, not calm all the time, but internally aligned, no longer split between who you are and who you think you're supposed to be. Anxiety in this light is not the problem, it is the friction created when parts of you are pushed into exile. Think about how often you learn to reject parts of yourself. You learn to hide fear to appear strong, to suppress anger to stay acceptable, to minimize needs to avoid rejection, to perform confidence while feeling unsure inside. Each time you did this, a small inner division formed, and anxiety grew in the space between those divisions because something in you knew the truth you were living around. When you begin to turn toward those disowned parts, not to fix them, but to include them, the inner conflict softens, the pressure eases, the nervous system begins to relax, not because life is suddenly safe, but because you are no longer at war with yourself. This is what it means to become whole. You stop asking, how do I get rid of this part of me, and start asking, how do I make room for it? You begin to notice that anxiety changes when you stop trying to be who you should be, when you let yourself feel uncertain without immediately correcting it, when you allow sadness without labeling it weakness, when you admit fear without judging yourself for it. Authenticity is not loud, it is relieving. The moment you stop performing for your own approval, something settles. The psyche no longer has to shout through anxiety to be heard. The thriller-like tension that ran through your inner life, the constant scanning, the anticipation of threat, the urge to control begins to dissolve into something quieter, more grounded, less dramatic. Not excitement, not constant happiness, but clarity. You start to recognize emotions as signals, not enemies. Anxiety becomes information, fear becomes guidance, unease becomes an invitation to listen more closely rather than react more quickly.